Human history is thoroughly saturated by violence and atrocity committed on behalf of good against people categorized as evil. And looking back through history, most of the mass horrors humanity has inflicted upon itself may have come from this kind of thinking. Welcome, I am Daisy, your hostess. If you are new to my channel, glad you found me. We're now in video 3 of an 8-part video series for the reading of the book titled The History of the Devil and the Idea of Evil from the Earliest Times to Present Day by Paul Carus. If this is where you found me, make sure to visit my playlist for previous chapters. You may find answers to what you seek. And to my family, friends, and subscribers, welcome back. I'm sure I'm not the only one that has been curious about the beginnings of this human experience. As I flip through these pages, I find it quite interesting how different cultures, through various means, have their version of God and Satan or the devil, of heaven and hell, and as it seems to be human nature to label things. Good and evil appear to be a subjective labeling, depending on what side of good and evil one stands. Scholars say that the time span between prehistoric man and the first recorded history is approximately 2.5 million years. From the first use of stone tools to the invention of writing around 3600 BC in Mesopotamia. The exact start of prehistory is based on the first tool use, while the end is marked by the emergence of writing systems like the Sumerian cuneiform. This marks the transition from prehistory to recorded history, although some earlier systems of proto-writing existed. Now the time span from the beginning of recorded history, which is around 3500 BC, to the present 2025 AD is approximately 5,000 years. What am I getting at, you might ask? Well, the author only speaks of that time period of the recorded history to the time of the publication of this book, which is in the public domain, was published in 1900. In this video, he will talk of the history of the devil and the idea of evil through the lens of Buddhism, which frankly, I learned something I didn't know about Hinduism, which was covered in the previous video, and Buddhism, which will be covered in this video. Truly, they are night and day. Buddhism does not have a concept of a creator, and they view the universe as cyclical, one that is governed by natural laws of cause and effect, known to them as karma. With that being said, they do not have a creation story either. They believe that the universe is without beginning or end, existing in a continuous cycle of formation and dissolution. The author will go more into detail in this video. Then he'll talk about the Gnostics. A most peculiar sect among them were the Ophites, also known as serpent worshippers, because on becoming acquainted with the biblical books, they regarded Yahweh, the God that was mentioned in the biblical books, as an evil deity. The Demiurge, or author of this visible and material world, and the serpent described in Genesis to them was associated with the symbol of wisdom and knowledge to be shared with the ones who seek. And so this Demiurge created the flawed material universe as a prison to trap divine spirit within humans. This seems to be the period of the emergence of the apocryphal books, which occurred during the time between the Old and New Testaments, roughly around 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD. The author in this video will attempt to show an amalgamation of concepts that were ever gradually giving rise, expanding from those earlier foundations, which were now being introduced as new philosophies that sought to provide explanations of concepts of good and evil, minus the sacrifices and the rites. And that set the stage for early Christianity. And at the heel of that comes the emergence of Jesus, who viewed the devil as a deceptive liar, the adversary to God's will, and the source of evil and sin. And he taught that the devil is a fallen angel who opposes God and tempts humans, and ultimately will have to deal with being judged. While the biblical accounts are the most detailed, there is extra biblical evidence from Roman and Jewish historians like Tacitus and Josephus, and early Christians corroborating Jesus' existence and crucifixion by order of Pontius Pilate. The historian Flavius Josephus was not a follower of Jesus. He wrote that Jesus was around when the early church was getting started, so he knew people who had seen and heard Jesus. Additionally, he wrote in the Testimonium Flavianum describing a man who did surprising deeds and was condemned to be crucified by Pilate. It is written in the Bible that Jesus was crucified by Pilate and dies. The Apostle Paul, along with Silas and Timothy, wrote the first book of Thessalonians, proclaiming that his opinion is the word of the Lord, and reminds the people of Jesus' words that, quote, "Some will not taste of death till they have seen the kingdom of God with power," followed by the message that, "For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ shall rise first." End quote. But the disciples were disappointed at the non-appearance of the Lord. He did not show up on the clouds of heaven as they were told he'd come. And what followed was a sort of dissension and branching off. And as far as Christianity goes, the present world remains in the power of Satan until the prophecy of the second advent of Christ be fulfilled. The belief in Satan and hell form an essential part of early Christianity, which the author is going to expand in detail. In addition to his old names of Satan, Beelzebub, and Devil, the evil one is called in the New Testament the Prince of this world. And we are told that we had better be prepared for meeting his onslaughts, as says the author of the first epistle of St. Peter, stating, quote, "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion walketh about, seeking whom he may devour." End quote. It seems that by this time, the devil is now corporeal and walking among men. And so the present world remains in the power of Satan until the prophecy of the second advent of Christ be fulfilled. All goes south from there, as the author will provide more details. But before I turn the page, I was thinking, okay, we know what we currently know about the things that we've dug up in previous histories, but what about prehistoric man, the non-recorded stuff? What, if any, were his concepts of the devil and the idea of evil? According to some scholars, there is strong archaeological evidence suggesting prehistoric man held spiritual and ritualistic beliefs, including the ritualistic burial of the dead and the creation of symbolic art. These practices, which began in the Middle to Upper Paleolithic periods, which is 45,000 to 300,000 years ago, hint, according to some of these evidence, at early concepts of afterlife and ancestor worship. Animism, which is the belief in spirits and all things. There is evidence of animal and fertility cults and shamanism. Some of these archaeological evidence include those burial customs, cave paintings, ritual use of pigments like the red ochre, and symbolic artifacts like the lion man. All these suggest a complex spiritual life, possibly involving a belief in a spirit world and the afterlife, but not necessarily in a single deity. Lower Paleolithic remains have also been interpreted as bearing associations with funerary rites. Bones at Cima de los Huesos and other archaeological evidence stretch from Germany to China, revealing signs of cannibalism, pointing at ritualistic cannibalism. The Pakaa Nova people, which have a population of approximately 2,700 in Brazil, used to practice mortuary cannibalism, eating the bodies of deceased members of their own group as an act of affection, respect, and compassion for the dead. This was seen as a respectful way to dispose of the body, in contrast to the burial in the cold wet ground, which they considered disrespectful and polluting. This practice helped the survivors cope with their grief by removing physical reminders of the deceased and transforming the body substance into living people. They ceased their ritualistic endocannibalism practices in the 1960s with the missionary Reformation. According to studies, the Pakaa people concept of evil is linked to specific, often personal, agency rather than an abstract force. Their traditional worldview is described as a form of animism and shamanism, where the natural world and its elements are imbued with the spiritual essence and life force. Very similar to the Buddhist, I guess minus the cannibalism, right? There were two forms of cannibalism, as I mentioned, and I left an interesting article in the description of this video titled, "Thus Our Bodies, Thus Our Custom, Mortuary Cannibalism in an Amazonian Society." Do make sure to check it out. Very, very interesting read. Although rare, cannibalistic practices still occur in the world today due to cultural, ritualistic, or even pathological reasons. Recent cases have been reported in countries like Papua New Guinea, as we mentioned, Brazil, North Korea, and these were stemming from a variety of motivation, such as your tradition, maybe that's what they've been doing, survival, or even criminal acts. Some of these groups still practice endocannibalism and exocannibalism, that means eating their enemies. As curious as I'd be to find out what their concept of the devil and idea of evil is, I'm not one to rush and ask them. I may not make it back to share my findings with you. And before I get started and turn the page, please do hit the like button, share this with like-minded people, subscribe to the channel. The History of the Devil and the Idea of Evil, from the Earliest Times to the Present Day, by Paul Carus. Buddhism. Buddhism is a religious revolution against the evils that are dominant in Brahmanism. Gautama Shakyamuni, who claimed to be the enlightened one, the Buddha, rejected bloody sacrifices, the authority of the Vedas, trust in rituals and the caste system, and taught a religion of moral endeavor which was to be obtained by enlightenment, or the Bodhi. He recognized the existence of evil and sought salvation in the radical abolition of all selfishness through the extension of an all-comprehensive love toward all creatures. The many-sidedness of Buddhism is well illustrated in the Buddhistic conception of evil and of a final escape from evil, which is taught to the thinker in the shape of a philosophy and to the uneducated masses in the garb of a poetical myth, affording the artist a good opportunity for representing deep thoughts in allegorical form. Māra, the evil one. Evil is personified in Māra, the Buddhist devil, who represents temptation, sin, and death. He is identified with Namuchi, one of the wicked demons in the Indian mythology with whom Indra struggles. Namuchi is the mischievous spirit who prevents rain and produces drought. The name Namuchi means not letting go the waters. However, Indra, the god of thunderstorms, forces him to surrender the fertilizing liquids and restores the life-bringing element to the earth. Māra is also called Papiyan, the wicked one, or the evil one, the murderer, the tempter. Footnote: Papiyan means more or very wicked. It is the comparative form of the Sanskrit papin, wicked. In addition, he is said to be Varsarvarti, meaning he who fulfills desires. Vasarvarti indeed is one of his favorite names. In his capacity as Vasarvarti, Māra personifies the fulfillment of desire, or the triple thirst: the thirst for existence, the thirst for pleasure, the thirst for power. He is the king of the heaven of sensual delight. Footnote: Vasarvarti is Sanskrit, the Pali form of Vasarvati, derived from Vasa, wish, desire. Childers explains the word as a bringing into subjection. Māra is also called Paranimita Vasavati, which means bringing into subjection that which is created by others. Pali Tanha, Sanskrit Trishna. End of footnote. There is a deep truth in this conception of Māra as Vasarvati. It means that the selfishness of man is Satan, and the actual satisfaction of selfishness is hell. This reminds us of one of the Leander's Marcan, in which we are told that once a man died and awoke in the other world, there St. Peter appeared before him and asked him what he wanted. He then ordered breakfast, the daily papers, and all the comforts he was accustomed to in life. And this kind of life lasted for many centuries until he got sick of it and began to swear at St. Peter and to complain of how monotonous it was in heaven, whereupon St. Peter informed him that he was in hell. For hell is where everybody has his own sweet will, and heaven is where everybody follows God's will alone. Similarly, according to the Buddhist conception, the heaven of sensual delight is hell, the habitation of the evil one. In the Dhammapada, Māra is not so much a person as a personification. The allegorical nature of the evil one is plainly felt in every passage in which Māra's name occurs. We read, for instance, quote, "He who lives looking for pleasures only, his senses uncontrolled, immoderate in his food, idle and weak, him, Māra, will certainly overthrow as the wind throws down a feeble tree." End of footnote. Buddhism in its original and orthodox purity knows nothing of devils except Māra, representing the egotistical pleasures, sensuality, sin, and death. But Buddhist mythology, from the ancient Shatakas down to the most modern folklore of China and Japan, has peopled the universe with evil spirits of all kinds, such as the demons of thunder and lightning, to personify the various ills of life and the dangers that lurk everywhere in nature. While the evil consequences of sin are depicted in the tortures of hell, which are similar to the Christian belief, the final escape from evil is expressed in the belief that all good Buddhists will be reborn in the Western paradise. Māra, the enemy of Buddha. In the life of Buddha, Māra plays an important part. He is that principle which forms an obstacle to that attainment of Buddhahood. Having told how, in the night of the Great Renunciation, the deity of the door swung the gate open to let the future Buddha out, the Yataka continues, quote, "At that moment, Māra came there with the intention of stopping the Bodhisattva, and standing in the air, he exclaimed, 'Depart not, O my Lord! In 7 days from now, the wheel of empire will appear, and will make you sovereign over the 4 continents and the 2,000 adjacent isles. Stop, O my Lord!'" End quote. The prince refused to listen to Māra's wily insinuation. When Buddha, in his search for enlightenment, had tried for 7 years to find the right path in asceticism and self-mortification, his health began to give way, and he was shrunken like a withered branch. At this moment, Māra drew near and suggested to him the thought of giving up his search for enlightenment. We read in the Padana Sutta, footnote, Sacred Books of the East, Volume 10, end footnote, quote, "Came Namuchi, speaking words full of compassion. Thou art lean, ill-favored, death is in thy neighborhood. Living life, O thou venerable one, is better. Living, thou wilt be able to do good works. Difficult is the way of exertion, difficult to pass, difficult to enter upon." To Māra, thus speaking, Bhagavat said, "O thou friend of the indolent, thou wicked one, for what purpose hast thou come here? Even the least good work is of no use to me, and what good works are required of Māra to tell? I have faith and power, and understanding is found in me. While thus exerting myself, why do you ask me to live? While the flesh is wasting away, the mind grows more tranquil, and my attention, understanding, and meditation becomes more steadfast. Living thus, my mind does not look for sensual pleasures. Behold, a being's purity. Lust thy first army is called, discontent thy second, thy third is called hunger and thirst, thy fourth desire, thy fifth is called sloth and drowsiness, thy sixth cowardice, thy seventh doubt, thy eighth hypocrisy and stupor, gain, fame, honor, and what celebrity is falsely obtained by him who exalts himself and despises others. This, O Namush, is thine, the Black One's fighting army. None but a hero conquers it, and whoever conquers it obtains joy. Woe upon life in this world. Death in battle is better for me than that I should live defeated. Seeing on all sides an army arrayed and Māra on his elephant, I am going out to do battle, that he may not drive me from my place. This army of thine, which the world of men and gods cannot conquer, I will crush with understanding, as one crushes an unbaked earthen pot with a stone. Having made my thoughts subject to me and my attention firm, I shall wander about from kingdom to kingdom, training disciples. They will be zealous and energetic, obedient to the discipline of one free from lust, and they will go to the place where there is no mourning. And Māra said, For 7 years I followed Bhagavat, step by step, but found no fault in the perfectly enlightened and thoughtful one. End of quote. When Buddha went to the Bo tree, Māra, the evil one, proposed to shake his resolution either through the allurements of his daughters or by force. He sounded the war cry and drew out for battle. The earth quaked when Māra, mounted on his elephant, approached the Buddha. The gods, among them Saka, the king of the gods, and Brahma, tried to stay Māra's army, but none of them was able to stand his ground, and each fled straight before him. Buddha said, quote, Here is this multitude exerting all their strength and power against me alone. My mother and father are not here, nor a brother, nor any other relative. But I have these 10 perfections, like old retainers long cherished at my board. It therefore behooves me to make the 10 perfections my shield and my sword, and to strike a blow with them that shall destroy the strong array. And he remained sitting and reflected on the 10 perfections. End of quote. Buddhism in Translations by H.C. Warren, page 77. Māra caused a whirlwind to blow, but in vain. He caused a rainstorm to come in order to drown the Buddha, but not a drop wetted his robes. He caused a shower of rocks to come down, but the rocks changed into bouquets. He caused a shower of weapons, swords, spears, and arrows to rush against him, but they became celestial flowers. He caused a shower of live coals to come down from the sky, but they too fell down harmless. In the same way, hot ashes, a shower of sand, and a shower of mud were transmuted into celestial ointments. At last he caused a darkness, but the darkness disappeared before Buddha as the night vanishes before the sun. Māra shouted, Siddhartha, arise from the seat. It does not belong to you. It belongs to me. Buddha replied, Māra, you have not fulfilled the 10 perfections. This seat does not belong to you, but to me, who have fulfilled the 10 perfections. Māra denied Buddha's assertion and called upon his army as witnesses, while Buddha declared, I have no animate witness present. But, stretching out his right hand towards the mighty earth, he said, Will you bear me witness? And the mighty earth thundered, I bear you witness. And Māra's elephant fell upon its knees, and all the followers of Māra fled away in all directions. When the host of the gods saw the army of Māra flee, they cried out, Māra is defeated. Prince Siddhartha has conquered. Let us celebrate the victory. When Buddha had attained enlightenment, Māra tempted him once more, saying, Shall not die, O evil one, until not only the brethren and sisters of the order, but also the lay disciples of either sex shall have become true hearers, wise and well-trained, ready and learned, versed in the scriptures, fulfilling all the greater and the lesser duties, correct in life, walking according to the precepts, until they, having thus themselves learned the doctrine, shall be able to tell others of it, preach it, make it known, establish it, open it, minutely explain it, and make it clear. Until they, when others start vain doctrines, shall be able by the truth to vanquish and refute it, and so to spread the wonder-working truth abroad. I shall not die until this pure religion of mine shall have become successful, prosperous, widespread, and popular in all its full extent. until in a word it shall have been well proclaimed among men. When shortly Buddha's death, Māra repeated his words as quoted above, "Pass away now, Lord, from existence." Buddha answered, "Make thyself happy. The final extinction of the Tathagata shall take place before long." Māra in Buddhist art. In the various sculptures representing scenes of Buddha's life, there is a figure holding in his hand a kind of double club or vajra, i.e. thunderbolt, as it is usually called. Since the expression of this man with the thunderbolt decidedly shows malevolence, the interpretation naturally suggested itself that he must be one of Buddha's disciples who was antagonistic to his teachings. The common explanation of this figure, accordingly, designated him as Devadatta, the Buddhistic Judas Iscariot, who endeavored to found a sect of his own, and who, according to Buddhistic legends, is represented as an intriguer bent on the murder of Buddha. The various representations of this figure, however, are not altogether those of a disciple who tries to outdo Buddha in sternness and severity and discipline, but frequently bear the character of a Greek faun and resemble, rather, Silenus, the foster father of Bacchus, representing all kinds of excesses in carousing and other pleasures. Moreover, the same figure, with the thunderbolt, appears in representations of Buddha entering nirvana, at a time when Devadatta had been long dead. Alfred Grundwettel, for these reasons, proposes to abandon the traditional interpretation of the thunderbolt bearer as Devadatta, and it appears that he has found the right interpretation when he says, quote, "This figure which accompanies Buddha from the moment he leaves his father's house until he enters nirvanas, and who waylays him in the hope of awakening in him a thought of lust or hatred or envy, who follows him like a shadow, can be no one but Māra Papiyan, the wicked one, the demon of passion." The thunderbolt in Māra's hand is nothing but the old attribute of all Indian gods. In his capacity as the god of pleasure, Māra is especially entitled to this attribute of the Hindu gods. As Vasavati, he reigns in the highest domain of the pleasure heaven, surrounded by dancing girls and musicians. End quote. It seems probable that the contrast in which Māra or Varsavarti stands to the Buddha began by and by to be misunderstood. For the thunderbolt bearer, Vajraprani, is gradually changed into a regular attendant of Buddha, and Vajra, or thunderbolt, is now interpreted as an attribute of Buddha himself. Thus it happened that among the northern Buddhists, the Vajra became the indispensable attribute of the Lamas. It is called Dorje in Tibet and Ojir in Mongolia. The attack of Māra upon Buddha under the Bo tree is a favorite subject of Buddhist artists, who gladly avail themselves of this opportunity to show their ingenuity in devising all kinds of beautiful and hideous shapes. Beautiful women represent the temptations of the daughters of Māra, and the hideous monsters describe the terrors of Māra's army. In Buddhistic mythology, Māra, the evil one, is in harmony with the spirit of Buddha's teaching, represented as the prince of the world. It is Māra who holds the wheel of life and death, Chavachakra, wheel of becoming, in his hands, for all living beings reside in the domain of death. The hand of death is upon everyone who is born. He is the ruler in the domains of the Nidanas, the 12 links of the chain of causation or dependent origination. The 12 Nidanas. The 12 Nidanas are a very old doctrine which possibly goes back to Buddha himself and may contain elements that are older. While the general meaning of the chain of causation is clearly indicated by the first and last links, which imply that ignorance, not knowing, or infatuation is at the bottom of all evil. There are great difficulties in the interpretation of the details, and Mr. Warren thinks that it is a combination of two chains of causation representing similar thoughts. He says, quote, "The Buddhist sacred books seem to claim dependent origination as the peculiar discovery of the Buddha. And I suppose they would have us understand that he invented the whole formula from beginning to end. But it is to be observed that the formula repeats itself, that the human being is brought into existence twice, the first time under the name of consciousness and name and form and by means of ignorance and karma, the second time in birth and by means of desire, with its four branches called attachments, and karma again, this time called existence." Footnote: the Visuddhimagga declares karma existence is equivalent to existence. End footnote. Therefore, though Buddhaghosa is at great pains to explain this repetition as purposefully intended for practical ends, yet one is much inclined to surmise that the full formula in its present shape is a piece of patchwork put together of two or more that were current in the Buddha's time and by him, perhaps expanded, perhaps contracted, but at any rate made into one. If the Buddha added to the formula of dependent origination, it would appear that the addition consisted in the first two propositions. For ignorance, of course, is the opposite of wisdom, and wisdom is the method for getting rid of ignorance. From Buddhism in Translations. Whatever may have been the original wording, the traditional formula of the causation of evil has been, without change, faithfully preserved in the triumphal progress of Buddhism from India to Japan. One of the oldest passages in which the 12 Nidanas are enumerated is found in the Questions of King Milinda, page 79, where we read, quote, "By reason of ignorance came the confections. By reason of confections, consciousness. By reason of consciousness, name and form. By reason of name and form, the 6 organs of sense. By reason of them, contact. By reason of contact, sensation. By reason of sensation, thirst. By reason of thirst, craving. By reason of craving, becoming. By reason of becoming, birth. By reason of birth, old age and death, grief, lamentation, sorrow, pain, and despair. Thus is it that the ultimate point in the past of all this time is not apparent." Translated by T.W. Rhys Davids in Sacred Books of the East, Volume 35. The Samyutta Nikaya enumerates as the second Nidana, karma, action. The passage reads, quote, "On ignorance depends karma. On karma depends consciousness. On consciousness depend name and form. On name and form depend the 6 organs of sense. On the 6 organs of sense depends contact. On contact depends sensation. On sensation depends desire. On desire depends attachment. On attachment depends existence. On existence depends birth. On birth depend old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, grief, and despair. Thus does this entire aggregation of misery arise. But on the complete fading out and cessation of ignorance ceases karma. On the sensation of karma ceases consciousness. On the sensation of consciousness ceases name and form. On the sensation of name and form cease the 6 organs of sense. On the sensation of the 6 organs of sense ceases contact. On the cessation of contact ceases sensation. On the cessation of sensation ceases desire. On the cessation of desire ceases attachment. On the cessation of attachment ceases existence. On the cessation of existence ceases birth. On the cessation of birth ceases old age and death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, grief, and despair. Thus does this entire aggregation of misery cease. From Buddhism in Translation, Warren, page 166. The Pali terms are 1. Avijja, ignorance, 2. Sankhara, organized formation, or Kamma, karma, 3. Vijnana, sentiency, 4. Namarupa, name and form, individuality, 5. Salayatana, the 6 fields, the 5 senses, and mind, 6. Phaso, contact, 7. Vedana, sensation, 8. Tanha, thirst, 9. Upadana, craving, 10. Bhava, growth, 11. Jati, birth, 12. Jara Marana, etc., old age, death, sorrow, etc. It seems that we have 3 chains of causation combined into one. One chain explains that karma, i.e. deed or activity, produces first vijnana, sentiency, and then manarupa, name and form or personality. The other begins with sensation as known in the 6 senses of salayatana, which by contact, phaso, produces first consciousness, vedana, and then thirst, tanha. The third group, which may be the peculiarly Buddhistic addition to the 2 older formulas, is founded in the first and second, and the 4 concluding links of the traditional chain, stating that ignorance, avijja, produces blindly in its random work organizations, sankharas. These sankharas, or elementary organisms, are possessed of craving, upadana, which leads to the conception, bhava, and birth, jati, thus producing old age, death, sorrow, and misery of any kind. The wheel of life. Life in its eternal rotation is represented in Buddhist mythology as a wheel that is held in the clutches of the evil one. Judging from a communication of Caroline A. Foley in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society in 1894, page 389, the allegory of the world wheel, the wheel of life, must be much older than is commonly thought, for it is mentioned already in the Divyavadana, page 299. Caroline Foley says, quote, "There it is related how Buddha instructed Ananda to make a wheel, Chakram Karayitavanya, for the purpose of illustrating what another disciple, Maudgalayayana, saw when he visited other spheres, which it seems he was in the habit of doing. The wheel was to have 5 spokes, Pankagandakam, between which were to be depicted the hells, animals, pretas, gods, and men. In the middle, a dove, a serpent, and a hog were to symbolize lust, hatred, and ignorance. All around the tire was to go the 12-fold circle of causation, Pratyasama, in the regular and in the inverse order. Beings were to be represented as being born in a supernatural way, Aupapaduka, as by the machinery of a water wheel, falling from one state and being produced in another. The wheel was made and placed in the grand entrance gateway, Davarkoshtake, and a bhiksu appointed to interpret it." End quote. Samsara, or the circuit of life, the eternal round of birth, death, and rebirth, as summarily expressed in the doctrine of the 12 nidanas, or 12-linked chain of causation, is painted around the tire of the wheel. How carefully the Buddhistic conception of Māra as the prince of the world, holding in his clutches the wheel of life, has been preserved. He can learn from a comparison of an old fresco in the deserted caves of Ajanta, central India, with Tibetan and Japanese pictures of the same subject. All of them show in the center the three causes of selfhood, viz., hatred, spite, and sloth, symbolized in a serpent, a cock, and a pig. They are also called the three fires, or the three roots of evil, which are raga, passion, doso, sin, moho, infatuation. The Hindu picture exhibits 6 divisions: the realm of gods, the realm of men, the realm of nagas or snakes. Footnote: we must remember that in some parts of India the serpent is the symbol of perfection and wisdom, a belief which was adopted by the Ophites, a Gnostic sect that revered the snake of the Garden of Eden as the instructor in the knowledge of good and evil and the originator of science. The realm of paradise, the realm of ghosts, and the realm of hell. The Tibetan picture shows the same domains, only less distinctly separated, while the Japanese picture shows only 5 divisions. In order to show the omnipresence of the Buddha as the principle that sustains all life, the Japanese picture shows a Buddha statue in the hub, while in the Hindu wheel, every division contains a Buddha figure. This Buddha in the world is the Buddha of transformations. Nirmanakaya, representing the tendency of life toward enlightenment. Outside of the wheel, 2 other Buddha figures appear. At the right-hand corner there is Buddha, the teacher, in the attitude of expounding the good law of righteousness. It is the Dharmakaya, the Buddha embodied in the Dharma, the law, religion, or truth. In the left-hand corner there is Buddha in the state of rest, represented as Sambhogakaya, the Buddha who has entered into nirvana and attained the highest bliss. The 12 Nidanas are an essential element in the Buddhist wheel of life and are commonly represented by 12 little pictures either on the tire or surrounding the picture. On the Japanese wheel, which exhibits the Nidanas more clearly than the older wheels, the series begins at the bottom, rising to the left-hand side and turning down again on the right-hand side. The first Nidana in Pali, Avijja, ignorance, is pictured as a passionate man of brutish appearance. The second Nidana in Pali, Sankara, Sanskrit Samskara, which is commonly but badly translated in English by confection, represents the ultimate constitutions of life or primary forms of organization, meaning a disposition of structures that possess the tendency to repeat the function once performed. It is represented as a potter's wheel on which vessels are manufactured. The word should not be confused with samsara, which is the whole wheel of life or the eternal round of transmigration. The third Nidana is Vijnana, or awareness, being the sentiency that originates by the repetition of function in the dispositions or organized structures previously formed. It is animal sense perception, represented as a monkey. The fourth Nidana is Namarupa, i.e., name and form, which expression denotes what we call personality, the name of a person and his personal appearance. It is represented by a pilot steering a boat. The fifth Nidana is called the 6 fields, or Sharayatana, which are what we call the 5 senses in mind or thinking, which is considered by Buddhists as a 6th sense. It is pictured as a human organism. The 6th Nidana is Faso or Sparsa, i.e., the contact of the 6 fields with their objects, represented as a lover's embrace. Rising from a contact of the 6 fields with their objects, the 7th Nidana is produced as Vedana, i.e., sensation or sentiment, illustrated by a sighing lover. If the 6th Nidana is enacted in the garden scene of Goethe's Faust, the 7th is characterized by Margaret's song, My peace is gone, my heart is sore. From a sentiment is the 8th nidana, tanha, i.e. thirst or desire rises. The picture exhibits the flirtation of two separated lovers. The 9th nidana is upadana, i.e. the clinging to existence. The picture shows us the lover following the footsteps of his love. The 10th nidana is bhava, bridal embrace, or existence in its continuation, finding its artistic expression in the union of the lovers who, seated on the back of an elephant, are celebrating their marriage feast. The 11th nidana is birth, jati, in the picture represented as a woman in her throes. The remaining groups represent the 12th nidana and its various sufferings, which consist of old age, disease, death, lamentation, complaints, punishments, and all kinds of tribulations. The 12 pictures of the Hindu wheel are less distinct, but there is no question about their meaning being exactly the same. Beginning at the top, on the right-hand side, we find first an angry man, representing ignorance, then a figure which might be a potter forming vessels of clay on the potter's wheel, representing the formation of dispositions or primary soul forms. The third picture represents a monkey climbing a tree, symbolizing animal perception or the individuality of organisms. The fourth picture shows a ship on a stream, representing the origin of mind under the allegory of a pilot. The fifth picture seems to be a house built upon 5 foundation stones, which we interpret as the 5 senses, the superstructure representing mind, the 6th sense. Then follows the 6th picture, a woman kindling desire of contact. The 7th represents sentiment in the shape of 2 sighing lovers. The 8th picture represents thirst or desire as 2 separated lovers. The 9th picture, reminding us of Adam and Eve in paradise, is a man plucking flowers or fruits from a tree. It illustrates the tasting of the apple of sexual love. The 10th picture illustrates pregnancy, the 11th birth, and the 12th is the demon of death carrying away the white body of a dead man. The Wheel of Life, as now frequently pictured in Buddhist temples of Japan, can, in its wanderings from India through Tibet and China, be traced back to a remote antiquity, for we know positively that this conception of the evil one in his relation to the world existed about 2,000 years ago, in the days when Buddhism still flourished in India. But it is not improbable that it must be dated back to a time preceding Buddha. We may fairly assume that when Buddha lived, such or similar representations of the significance of evil in life existed, and that he utilized the traditional picture for the purposes of spreading his own religion, adding thereto his own interpretation, and thus pouring new wine into old bottles. There is a possibility that the picture must be dated back to the age of demonolatry, when the idea prevailed that the good God need not be worshipped, but only the evil God, because he alone is dangerous to mankind. That the same idea, as expressed in the Buddhist Wheel of Life, existed in the remotest antiquity of our earliest civilization can be seen at a glance by looking at the picture of the Chaldean bronze tablet, which represents the 3 worlds, the realm of the gods, the abode of men, and the domain of the dead, as being held in the clutches of a terrible monster. The similarity of the tablet to the Buddhist Wheel of Life is too striking to be fortuitous. Religious symbols, formulas, and rites are, as a rule, punctiliously preserved even after a radical change of the fundamental ideas that are embodied therein. Judging by analogy from the religious evolution of other nations, we must assume that the original form of worship among the Akkadians was as much demonolatrous as it is at a certain stage of civilization among all savage tribes, and this bronze plate appears to preserve the lingering features of a prehistoric world conception. The simplest explanation that suggests itself is to regard the monster holding the world picture as the deity of evil, who in the period when religion still consisted merely in the fear of evil, was worshipped as the actual prince of the world whose wrath was propitiated by bloody sacrifices. If this view should prove to be correct, the Chaldean bronze plate of the monster holding in its claws the world would be the connecting link between the very dawn of religious notions with the foundation of Buddhism, where the worship of the evil deity has disappeared entirely. But the influence of this old mode of expression extends even into the sphere of the origin of Christianity, although here it fades from sight. In the New Testament, the Buddhist term, the wheel of life, is used once more, but it is a mere echo of a remote past. Its original significance is no longer understood. Speaking of the great damage caused in the world by the tongue, St. James says, translated from the Greek, "Thus the tongue that defileth the whole body standeth among our limbs, and it setteth on fire the wheel of becoming, and is set on fire by hell." The version of King James translates the term "troxo geneo," which in the Vulgate reads "rosa nativitalis," by course of nature. Northern Buddhism. The Buddhism of Tibet is not yet sufficiently explored on account of the inaccessibility of the country, but it is safe to say that its demonology is highly developed and shows traces of strong Hindu influences. Prominent among the evil spirits is Pakaa, the Tibetan form of the Hindu goddess Kali, who is represented as a frightful monster with a leonine head surrounded by a halo of flames and ready to devour everything she sees. In China, Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism exist peacefully side by side, and there is scarcely a home in the country where the customary homage would not be paid to Lao Tse and Confucius as well as to Buddha. Indeed, there are numerous illustrations in which these three great masters are together represented as dominating the moral life of China. In Japan, the conditions are similar, except that in the place of the popular Taoism, we find Shintoism, which is the aboriginal nature worship of the country, consisting at present in the observation of national festivals, in which form it has of late been declared to be the official state religion of the country. The folklore of Chinese Taoism and Japanese Shintoism was naturally embodied in the mythology of the Buddhist, and we find, therefore, in their temples innumerable representations of hell with all their traditional belongings. Emma, the stern judge of Meifu, the dark tribunal. Congo, the sheriff, and all the terrible staff of bailiffs, torturers, and executioners, among whom the steer-headed Gozu and the horse-headed Mezu are never missing. By the side of the judge's desk stands the most perfect mirror imaginable, for it reflects the entire personality of every being. Since man's personality, according to the Buddhistic soul conception, is constituted by the deeds done during life, the glass makes apparent all the words, thoughts, and actions of the delinquent who is led before it, whereupon he is dealt with according to his deeds. If good deeds prevail, he is awarded by being reincarnated in a higher state of existence, be it on earth or in the western paradise, or in one of the heavens of the gods, or if bad deeds prevail, he sinks into the lower spheres, in which case he must go back to life in the shape of that creature which represents his peculiar character. Or if he has been very wicked, he is doomed to hell, whither he is carried in the Ho no Kuruma, the fiery cart, the conveyance of the infernal regions. The sentence is pronounced in these words: "Thy evil deeds are not the work of thy mother, father, relatives, friends, advisors. Thou alone hast done them all. Thou alone must gather the fruit. Dragged to the place of torment, he is fastened to red-hot irons, plunged into fiery lakes of blood, raked over burning coals, and he dies not till the last residue of his guilt has been expiated. But the devil is not always taken seriously, and it appears that the Chinese and Japanese exhibit all the humor they are capable of in their devil pictures and statues, among which the Oni no Nembutsu, the devil as a monk, is perhaps the most grotesque figure. In the later development of Northern Buddhism, all the evils of this world, represented in various devil personalities, are conceived as incarnations of Buddha himself, who, by showing the evil consequences of sin, endeavors to convert mankind to holiness and virtue. We find in the Buddhist temples of China and Japan the so-called mandaras, which represent the world conception of Buddhism in its cosmic entirety. The word mandara means a complete ensemble, and it exhibits a systematically arranged group of Buddha incarnations. The statue of the highest Buddha who dwells in nirvana always stands in the center. It is Bodhi, enlightenment, or Sambodhi, perfect enlightenment, that is to say, the truth, eternal rightness, or rather verity, the objective reality that is represented in truth, which is the same forever and aye. He is personified under the name of Amitabha, which means boundless light, being that something the recognition of which constitutes Buddhahood. He is like God, the Father of the Christians, omnipresent and eternal, the light and life of the world, and the ultimate authority of moral conduct. Another prominent Buddha incarnation is Maitreya, the Buddha to come, who is the Christian Holy Spirit. He is the comforter whose appearance was promised by Buddha shortly before parting from his disciples. The catalogue of the Musée Guimet of Paris, the best religious museum in the world, describes a mandara in which the highest Buddha is the center of the group, is surrounded by a number of his incarnations of various degrees and dignities. These are the bodhisattvas, prophets and sages of the world, who have either taught mankind or set them good examples by their virtuous lives. On the right, we see a group of personified abstracts: piety, charity, science, religion, the aspiration for progress. On the left is a third class, consisting of the ugly figures of demons, whose appearance is destined to frighten people away from sensuality, egotism, and evil desires. The devils of Buddhism, accordingly, are not the enemies of Buddha, and not even his antagonists, but his ministers and co-workers. They partake of Buddha's nature, for they too are teachers. They are the rods of punishment, representing the curse of sin, and as such have also been fitly conceived as incarnations of the Bodhi. In this interpretation, the Buddhist devils cease to be torturers and become instruments of education who contribute their share to the general system of working out the final salvation of man. Christian salvation consists in an atonement of sin through the bloody sacrifice of a sinless Redeemer. Buddhist salvation is attained through enlightenment. Hence Christ is the sufferer, the innocent man who dies to pay with his life the debt of others who are guilty. Buddha is the teacher who by example and instruction shows people the path of salvation. The dawn of a new era. Gnostic societies and congregations. The transition from the Old to the New Testament is an age of unrest. The Jews had become familiar with the civilization of Assyria and Babylonia and enjoyed friendly relations with the Persians. But the intercourse and general exchange of thought among the nations of Western Asia became more extended and grew livelier since Alexander the Great's time, for now Greek as well as Indian views mixed and produced a powerful fermentation in the religious beliefs of the people. We may fairly assume that the doctrines of the Hindu reached Syria in vague and frequently self-contradictory forms, but they were new and attractive, and apt to revolutionize the traditional ethics of the people. Formerly, procreation of children was regarded as a duty and the acquisition of wealth as a blessing. Now it became known that there were also people who sought salvation in absolute chastity and poverty. The highest morality of the monks of India was no longer the strength of maintaining oneself in the struggle of existence, but the surrender of all strife and a radical renunciation of self. There are especially three ideas which dominated the whole movement and acted as a leaven in the dough: the idea of the spirituality of the soul, the hope of the soul's escape from bodily existence, and the method of obtaining this liberation by wisdom, Sophia, or enlightenment, Gnosis. The realization of the Gnostic ideal was called, as the Greek would say, pleroma, or fulfillment, which was either expected by the soul's attainment of salvation after the fashion of the Buddhist nirvana, or for the whole world through the appearance of a savior, a messiah. The spirit of the times showed itself in the foundation of various religious societies, which originated somewhat after the fashion of the modern theosophical movements. There were bands of students of the new problems in almost all larger cities who investigated the doctrines of salvation and immortality, and in addition, there were enthusiasts who tried to apply the new principles in practical life. The former called themselves learners or disciples, the latter holy ones or healers, therapeutae. With regard to the problem of evil, the most peculiar sect was the Gnostics of Syria, from the church fathers called serpent worshippers or Ophites, because on becoming acquainted with the biblical books, they regarded Yahweh, the demiurge or author of this Bible and material world, as an evil deity, with the serpent, with his promise of giving knowledge or gnosis to man, appeared to them as a messenger of the true and good God. This God of goodness, they declared, was unlike Yahweh, free of passions and full of love and mercy. He was, as Irenaeus informs us, triune, being at once the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. The Father is the prototype of man, an idea which is carried out in Kabbalah as the Adam Kadmon. The Son is the eternal reason or comprehension, Erota, and the Spirit is the female principle of spiritual generation. Similar ideas concerning the triune Godhead and the salvation from evil are reported of other sects, and especially of Simon Magus, who is mentioned in the Acts as having been baptized by St. Peter and condemned for his opinion that the Holy Ghost could be bought with money. We know of sects in Judea, the Nazarenes, the Sabians or baptizers, the Essenes, and the Ebionites, which were born of the same seeking spirit of the age. Footnote: St. John the Baptist was a Sabian. The name is derived from Saba, to baptize. End of footnote. But we must bear in mind that the members of these societies belonged exclusively to the poorer classes of society and formed a third party which was quite distinct from the Orthodox Pharisees and the liberal Sadducees. They are to us of importance, however, because from their midst proceeded the man who was destined to become the standard bearer of a new faith and the representative incarnation of the new religion, Jesus of Nazareth. The Apocrypha of the Old Testament. The literature of this period was no longer received into the canon of the Old Testament and is therefore, in spite of many good qualities, even to the present day, regarded as apocryphal. The New World conception, which emphasized the contrast between body and soul, developed a new moral ideal, and the conception of evil underwent the same subtle changes as the conception of goodness. Since the lower classes began to make their influence felt, it is natural that in the apocryphal books of the Old Testament, the conception of Satan grew more mythological and at the same time more dualistic. He developed into an independent demon of evil, and now, perhaps under the influence of Persian views, the adversary of man became the adversary of God himself. in the story of Tobit, 150 BC, an evil spirit called Asmodee plays an important part. His name, which in its original form is Aishma Deva, indicates a Persian origin. He tries to prevent Sarah's marriage because he is in love with her himself. In the Talmud, Asmodee develops into the demon of lust. Very valuable books among the Apocrypha are the Book of Daniel and the 2 books of Esdras, but the noblest thoughts are mixed with Judaistic chauvinism and bitter hatred of the Gentile nations. Esdras anticipates the general eschatology as well as many smaller details of the Christian doctrines in a more definite shape than any other author of the period. He even proclaims in the 2nd book of Esdras, volume 7, verse 28, the name of the Savior, whom the Lord calls my son Jesus. Esdras mentioned 2 abysmal beings, Enoch and Leviathan, but they do not take any part in the production of evil. He might as well have omitted to mention them. In the name of God, an angel explains to him the origin of evil as follows in a simile which reminds us of both the Buddhist parable of the city of Nirvana and Christ's Sermon on the Mount. Quote, a city is builded and set upon a broad field, and is full of all good things. The entrance thereof is narrow, and is set in a dangerous place to fall, like as if there were a fire on the right hand, and on the left a deep water, and one only path between them both, even between the fire and the water, so small that there could but one man go there at once. If the city now were given unto man for an inheritance, if he never shall pass the danger set before it, how shall he receive this inheritance? And I said, it is so, Lord. Then said he unto me, even so also is Israel's portion, because for their sakes I made the world. And when Adam transgressed my statutes, then was decreed that now is done. Then were the entrances of this world made narrow, full of sorrow and travail. They are but few and evil, full of peril and very painful. For the entrances of the elder world were wide and sure, and brought immortal fruit. If then they that live labor not to enter these straight and painful things, they can never receive those that are laid up for them. End of quote from the 2nd book of Esdras, chapter 7, verse 6 through 14. A peculiarly interesting apocryphal work is ascribed to the patriarch Enoch. The Book of Enoch undertakes to explain in allegorical form God's plan of the world's history. The book is not yet Christian, but shows many traces of doctrines professed by the sects which appeared at the beginning of the Christian era as competitors of Christianity. While Enoch's demonology smacks of the religious myths of the Gentiles, his ideas of salvation from evil betray Gnostic tendencies. We read, for example, in chapter 42, wisdom came to live among men and found no dwelling place. Then she returned home and took her seat among the angels. We read of the Messiah commonly designated the Son of a woman, sometimes the Son of Man, and once the Son of God, that he existed from the beginning. Quote, ere the sun and the signs in the zodiac were made, ere the stars of the heavens were created, his name was pronounced before the Lord of the spirits. Before the creation of the world, he was chosen and hidden before him, God, and before him he will be from eternity to eternity. All the secrets of wisdom will flow from the thoughts of his mouth, for the Lord of the spirits has given wisdom unto him and has glorified him. In him liveth the spirit of wisdom, and the spirit of him who giveth comprehension, and the spirit of the doctrine and of the power, and the spirit of all those who are justified and are now sleeping. And he will judge all hidden things, and no one will speak trifling words before him. For he is chosen before the Lord of the spirits. He is powerful in all secrets of justification, and injustice has no place before him. End of quote. And God says of the sons of the earth, quote, I and my son shall unite ourselves with them forever and aye in the paths of righteousness for all their lives. End quote. The spiritualistic views in the Book of Enoch, especially the supernatural personality of the Messiah, are not peculiarly Christian, but Essenic or Gnostic, standing even in contradiction to the idea that the Messiah would become flesh and live among men as a real man. It is a pity that we do not possess the original, but only an Ethiopian version of the Book of Enoch, which has been translated into German by Dr. A. Dillman, for it is of great interest to the historian. It breathes the spirit of Judaistic Gnosticism, and it is probable that the original Book of Enoch was written in the year 110 BC by a Jew of the Pharisee party. The Book of Wisdom and the Gnostic Trinity idea. The Book of Wisdom, a product of Alexandrian Judaism, showing traces of both Greek and Eastern influences, speaks of the devil as having, through envy, introduced death into the world. We read, quote, God created man to be immortal and made him to be an image of his own eternity. Nevertheless, through envy of the devil came death into the world, and they that do hold of his side do find it. End quote. The wisdom literature shows many traces of Indian influence. The very word wisdom or Sophia seems to be a translation of the term Bodhi. At the same time, the Trinity idea begins to take root in the Jewish mind, the oldest form of it being molded after the pattern of the family, which consists of father, mother, and child. The wisdom books represent the relation of Sophia to God as his spouse and the Messiah as their son. Many Gnostics use the terms Sophia, Pneuma, and Logos as names for the second person of the deity, who represented the divine motherhood of the God-man. But during the first period of the development of the Christian Church, the ideal of a godmother was abandoned. The Logos was identified with God the Son, who now became the second person of the Trinity, and the name Pneuma, or Spirit, was alone retained for the third person. The Gnostic Trinity conception, however, left its trace in the Christian Apocrypha, for in the Gospel according to the Hebrews, Christ spoke of the Holy Ghost as his mother. Footnote: see the book by St. Jerome or Hieron titled Against Pelagius, Chapter 3. End of footnote. The Trinity idea is of a very ancient origin. We encounter it in the religion of Babylon, in Brahmanism, and in Buddhism. The Buddhists take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, called the three jewels, representing 1. Buddha, the teacher, 2. the Buddhist religion or the good law, and 3. the Buddhist brotherhood or church. The Trinity doctrine is not contained in the New Testament. All the passages would seem to involve it being spurious, but it forms an integral part of almost all Gnostic systems, where it either appears as 3 abstract principles or as the family relation of father, mother, and child viewed as one. The Trinity idea of God as a divine unity of Father, Mother, and Christ child was retained among the Oriental Christians to the days of the rise of Mohammedanism. The Quran knows as yet nothing of the spiritualized Trinity conception of the Western Church, but represents the Christian Trinity as consisting of God, Christ, and Mary. And this Gnostic Trinity conception is a natural ideal which in the further development of Christianity proved strong enough to influence the Roman Catholic Church in her devotion to Mary, the Mother of Christ, whose personality was sometimes superadded to the Trinity and sometimes even suffered to replace the Holy Ghost. The more abstract form of the Trinity, emphasizing it as a Trinity, found its artistic expression in pictures of God as possessed of 3 faces. The most striking among these productions is an old oil painting which was discovered by a German artist at Salerno and published for the first time in Die Garderobe, 1882. The four eyes, in their meditative attitude, make a weird impression on the spectator. The three elongated noses show a freedom from sensuality. The brown hair and beard indicate strength, the broad forehead, wisdom. A modern Gnostic. Jacob Boehm's philosophy is, in this connection, of interest because it represents a revival of the spirit of Gnosticism in its best and most typical form. It may serve as a substitute to characterize, by way of example, the modes of thought of the ancient Gnostic systems and their comprehension of the problem of evil. Jacob Boehme was a German mystic born in 1575 at Alt-Seidenberg near Görlitz in Silesia. Like David, he was in his childhood a shepherd. Having served from his 14th year as a shoemaker's apprentice and being affiliated with the Shoemaker Guild, he established himself as a master shoemaker in Görlitz in 1599. Later on in his life, he changed his trade for that of a glover. His books circulated during his lifetime in manuscript form only, but even this sufficed to make his name known beyond the limits of his native town. He died on Sunday, November 17, 1624, at his home in Görlitz, much admired by his friends and persecuted by some narrow-minded enemies who showed their malice even after his death by defacing the monument of the deceased philosopher. The best evidence, however, of his genius and the recognition which his honest aspirations found among his fellow citizens appears in the fact that the son of the Reverend Gregorius Richter, the pastor primarius of Görlitz and the bitterest antagonist of Jacob Boehme, edited a collection of extracts from his writings, which were afterwards published complete at Amsterdam in the year 1682. The similarity of Jacob Boehme's speculations to Gnosticism is apparent, but the coincidence is almost spontaneous. His education was very limited, and he was only superficially familiar with the theories of Paracelsus, Theophrastus Bombast von Hohenheim, 1493-1541, Caspar Schwemfeld, 1490-1561, and Valentin Weigel, 1533-1588. His own system is original with him. It is mainly due to a reflection on the Bible, which he read with a deeply religious spirit, but preserving at the same time great independence of thought. Jacob Boehme conceives God as the unfathomable ground of existence, as the Ungrund. His biographer in the Encyclopedia Britannica says of his philosophy, quote, "Nature rises out of him. We sink into him." The same view, when offered in the colder logic of Spinoza, is sometimes set aside as atheistical. Translating Boehme's throughout of the uncouth dialect of material symbols, as to which one doubts sometimes whether he means them as concrete instances, or as pictorial illustrations, or as a mere memoria technica, we find that Boehme conceives of the correlation of two triads of forces. Each triad consists of a thesis, an antithesis, and a synthesis. And the two are connected by an important link. In the hidden life of the Godhead, which is at once nix and als, exists the original triad, viz. Attraction, diffusion, and the resultant, the agony of the unmanifested Godhead. The transition is made. By an act of will, the divine spirit comes to light, and immediately the manifested life appears in the triad of love, expression, and the resultant visible variety. As the action of contraries and the resultant are explained, the relations of soul, body, and spirit, of good, evil, and free will, of the spheres of the angels, of Lucifer, and of this world. It is a more important problem to account on this philosophy for the introduction of evil. Evil is a direct outcome of the primary principle of divine manifestation. It is the wrath side of God. End quote. The problem of the idea of evil is very prominent in Jacob Boehme's philosophy and has found a monistic solution. Without identifying good and evil, he arrives at the conclusion that the existence of evil is intrinsically necessary and unavoidable. It is ultimately rooted in the nature of God himself. The yearning for self-realization constitutes a suffering in God himself, and in the act of revealing himself, his will manifests both the bright and the darkest aspect of life. Jacob Boehme anticipates Schopenhauer. He says in his book on the threefold life of man, page 56, quote, "For all things stand in the will, and in the will they are conducted. If I do not conceive a will to walk, my body remaineth at a standstill. Therefore my will beareth me. And if I have no desire for moving to some place, there is no will in me. But if I desire something else, it is of the essence, the will. The eternal word is the eternal will." End of quote. Materiality and sensuality are identified with sin, and sin begins not with the actual fall but with lusting, sleep being a symptom of this condition. Quote, "Before his sleep Adam was in the form of an angel, but after his sleep he had flesh and blood, and there was a clod of the ground in his flesh." End quote. From Didrae Principien, page 221. With all his Gnostic tendencies, Jacob Boehme is not a dualist, but a monist. The duality of life viewed under the aspect of a higher unity constitutes a trinity whose three principles are presented in the frontispiece of Jacob Boehme's book on the subject as two overlapping spheres, which by meeting produce a third domain. There is an eternal goodness, and there is an eternal badness, and there is an eternal mixture of both. The eternal goodness contains the divine spirit and all the angels, but the sphere of badness is no less eternal. It is in its ultimate constitution the materiality of the world. The original Adam, a kind of Platonic prototype of man, was spiritual. His fall begins with his falling to sleep, the result of carnal desire which changes his nature and leads to the creation of the woman to tempt him. But Jacob Boehme is not a dualist, for he conceives of the three spheres as being one. He says in his book on the threefold life of man in page 16, quote, "We remind the God-living and seeking reader to recognize this of God. He should not concentrate his mind and senses to seek the pure Godhead in loneliness, high above the stars, as living solely in the heavens. No, the pure Godhead is everywhere, entirely present in all places and ends. There is everywhere the birth of the Holy Trinity in one being, and the angelic world reaches unto all the ends wherever thou mayst think, even into the middle of the earth, stones and rocks, consequently also into hell. Briefly, the empire of the wrath of God is also everywhere." End quote. Jacob Boehme does not believe in the letter, but in the spirit of the Bible. And although he is counted a mystic, the illumination which he seeks is as sober as you can expect of a man of his culture. He freely utilizes the scriptures, but urges good Christians to seek the key to the problems of existence deeper. He says, "No one can come to God except through the Holy Ghost." And by the Holy Ghost, he understands this spiritual illumination of heart and mind. He says, quote, "Search for the ground of nature. Thus you will comprehend all things. And do not madly go for the mere letter of the histories, nor make any blind laws according to your own imaginings, wherewith you persecute one another. In this you are blinder than heathen. Search for the heart and spirit of the scriptures, that the spirit may be born in you, and that the center of the divine love may be unlocked in you. Thus you may recognize God and speak of him rightly. For out of the histories merely, no one shall call himself a master, cognizer, and knower of the divine essence, but out of the Holy Ghost, which appeareth in another principium, in the center of man's life, and only to him who searches rightly and seriously." End of quote. Jacob Boehme condenses his philosophy in his explanation of the frontispiece of his threefold life, where he says, quote, "Every work indicates by its form, essence, and character the wisdom and virtue of its maker. Now, if we contemplate the grandly marvelous edifice of the visible heaven and earth, consider their motions, inquire into their efficiencies and forces, and judge of the differences of the bodies of the creature, how they are hard and soft, gross and subtle, dark and radiant, opaque and pellucid, heavy and light. We shall at once discover the twofold mother of the revelation of God, viz. Darkness and light, which have breathed themselves out of all their forces and sealed miracles, and formed themselves together with the firmament, the stars, the elements, and all the visible conceivable creatures, where life and death, goodness and evil, are at once in each thing. That is the third of the two hidden lives, and it is called time contending with vanity. Thus this world standeth in the mixed life of time between light and darkness, as a genuine mirror of the two, in which the marvels of eternity are revealed in the form of time through the Word, as John announces, all things were made by it, and without it was not anything made that was made." End quote. The Gnostic movement, and especially its Jewish phase, manifesting itself in sectarian life and in the post-canonical literature, is of greater importance than is generally admitted, for it prepared the way for Christianity. Many Christian dogmas, such as the bodily resurrection of the dead, the Messiah as the Son of Man, the approach of the Day of Judgment, are in the Old Testament Apocrypha, as it were, tentatively pronounced. A comprehensive formulation of the new religious ideals begins to be needed, and the people find at last, in Jesus of Nazareth, a leader whose powerful personality affords a center around which the fermenting innovations can crystallize into an organized institution, the Christian Church, destined to become a new and most influential factor in the history of the world. End of chapter. If you haven't done so, please do hit the like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Let's head over to the next video as we continue with this book titled The History of the Devil and the Idea of Evil, from the earliest times to the present day, by Paul Carus. In the next video, we're going to learn about early Christianity and the idea of salvation.